piece of things we want to learn. Welcome, people. It is Tuesday afternoon, and this is the Work the Web Tuesday classes, and we're going to cover programming concepts, programming fundamentals, and a little bit about Agile today. And on Thursday this week, we're going to write more automated tests. So for those of you who missed the weekend sessions, we did a little bit of free or brainstorming regarding things that we want to cover in this training program, and we created a fairly extensive and very ambitious wish list. Not so much in the first 4 weeks, perhaps, but then we went crazy on the second part of the program. We want to, cover the RESTful architecture, three-tier model view controller, and then WebSockets. I emphasize the importance of practicing working with legacy code, and then we started to talk about GraphQL, performance tuning, DevOps, Elasticsearch, Electron, security, accessibility, and so on. So we have a lot of things to cover. So we have to work hard. But then again, nothing is set in stone yet. This is a community training or facilitated training program. So we, the participants, or you, the participants, or me, together, we can form the curriculum as we move forward. And the sound works on Twitch. Good. Thank you. All right. So let's see if we can move on with today's content. Right, programming concepts. Right. So, yes, I prepared a slide deck, people, but I will be jumping in and out of this slide deck because we will be doing a little bit of coding, and I want to approach this topic from a slightly different perspective than you are probably used to from other training programs or tutorials or education and everything like that. I often when you learn to code, you learn to code in a specific language, right? And that's perfectly fine. That's one way of doing it. I would like to take a different look at this from a different perspective and think about the concepts, and then do a little bit of examples in 3 different programming languages. And I think that the effect of doing that this way would be that you can very early on start to see similarities between different programming language, instead of being kind of scared that now I know JavaScript, let's stick to that and let's not touch anything else, because it might be tough. It is actually not that hard. Syntax is of course different, and there are different ways of doing things and so on. But at the end of the day, there are certain things you want to do when you build software, and on a conceptual level, many programming languages are very, very similar. However, I don't want to dive too deep and be too broad, so I will focus on those 3 languages because they do have something in common, and that is that they are interpreted and not compiled. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So what I want you to do is to approach this talk from a perspective of code along, or at least note along, as we say sometimes. So you take notes, or at least write a little bit of code, perhaps execute a little bit of code as we move forward, because as I usually say, you can't learn how to swim unless you jump into the water, and the same thing applies to coding. You can't learn about coding if you don't code. So I will be doing very small exercises today in those 3 programming languages, and I would like you to do the same if possible. And again, this is the teaching philosophy of mine, tell, show, practice, reflect. So in this session, this reflective part will be kind of baked in because we want to see similarities between various programming languages and see how certain concepts apply directly when we do that. So I will talk a lot and I will show you some stuff, but try to practice and try to reflect as much as possible. Okay, so when we started this camp, we kind of looked into prerequisites of to get by, and we spoke about that you need to have some basic knowledge of HTML and CSS, basic knowledge of programming, a desire to learn how to code, and a desire to work together with others, and some grit. And today we're going to cover this basic knowledge about programming. That is what we want to do. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to share my screen on Google Meet as well. I am so sorry about that. There's always something, right? Isn't it? There we go. You should see that now. Right. So, Python. Python is, I will not tell you the entire story about Python, just a very brief overview. Python is an interpreted high-level general purpose programming language. And what does high level mean? Well, it means that it comes with a lot of functionality already built into the language. When we talk about general purpose, is that you can use it for many various applications, whether it's web-based or embedded systems or what have you, right? Ruby, and yeah, I have a screenshot of my terminal. That means that you can execute Python code directly on your computer by saying Python or Python 3.9 in your terminal and hitting enter. You will you will enter into an interactive Python console. It's a place where you can basically execute Python code directly. So you can try that. You can try Python 3.9, and if that doesn't work, you can just type Python and hit enter, and you should get into this console. Ruby also comes with a console that you start by typing 3 letters, I, R, and B, and hit enter. Then you should enter an interactive Ruby console. And Ruby is also an interpreted high-level general-purpose programming language, very much similar to Python. These two languages are very distant cousins, but nonetheless cousins, you could say. And then we have JavaScript, of course, that many of you know, also a high level, not general purpose, but still interpreted programming language, compiled just in time. It does compile in your browser and or on your server. And alongside HTML and CSS, as we know, we spoke about this at length, it's the core technology of the World Wide Web, which is like the part of the net that we all know. And you can also open up an interactive console to execute JavaScript code in your terminal if you type node and hit enter, and there you go. And if you do all that in 3 different terminal windows, you will of course end up asking me, how do I get the hell out of there, right? Because you open up those consoles and then you don't know how to exit them. So we will cover that in just a second, because going in means that you also have to be able to get the hell out of there at some point. All right, so let's talk a little bit of concepts. So to start with, what are the building blocks of things that you want to do in order, or of any type of software? There are many names for this. People talk about primitive data types or complex data types and so on. But let's start off slowly. Basically, what you do have to your disposal are a few data types, like strings, numbers, floats, booleans, arrays, and objects. Okay, a string is very simple. It's a piece of text. A number is exactly what it implies to be a number. A float is a little different than a number because a float is a number with decimals, and that's basically the only difference between numbers and floats. Booleans are interesting because they represent true or false. That is a specific data type. It's symbolized by 0 and 1, true or false, often. Uh, yeah. But the two interesting ones here are at the end, arrays and objects. We will talk a little bit more about that. This is not a complete list. There are other data types, of course, in various programming languages, but these are fairly generic. And if you understand those, then you are good to go, often. And a data type is a set of values and some allowable operations, some functionality attached to those values, and they have different names in different programming languages. For instance, arrays and objects are named slightly different in Ruby, Python, and JavaScript, but we will talk about that in a second. Right. So, quite often you want to be able to store information, right? Somehow. And if you want to store info or data, actually, let's talk about that for a second. Could anybody tell me the difference between information and data? Anyone ever thought about that? Go ahead, Anya. I see you want to answer.
No, I just wondered whether data is just a bit more, let's say, factual and I don't know, but actually I'm not sure. So
Okay.
I'm
Anybody else?
going by memory. I think data is processed information.
I would say other way around. Well,
otherwise, yeah.
yeah, other way around. I would say. So let's say. So I used to run this example of a few years ago when I was a bit younger. So I have a son, and he has enormous feet, right? He has 48 in European sizes. That's massive, right? And to a degree where it's hard to buy shoes for him. And back a few years ago, I was 48 years old, right? So let's think about the number 48. If taken out of context, it doesn't mean anything, right? It's just a number. When put into a context, it becomes information. Do you understand? Like Thomas is 48 years old, or Oliver has 48 in shoe size, right? So the same data can mean something completely different in a different context. So usually, I usually say that information is data put into a context. Does that make sense? It does. Good.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes you want to store data somehow, right? You can store it in variables, constants, and procedures if you want to store it temporarily. And if you want to store it permanently or persistently, you can store data in files, databases, cookies, session storage, and so on, right? Now, we're going to talk a little bit about context and data and, for instance, variables and naming standards in later today, because it's actually very interesting. But often when you write a little bit of when you write some software, you want to store some values or some data in a specific way so you can process it. And the concept of variables and constants is very basic for being able to write programs, right? And also to permanently store data somehow so you can access it over time is also very relevant. But then there is other questions that you ask yourself sometimes, right? How do I do arithmetics, right? You want to do math operators and logical operators. And this is something that programming languages brings to the table. You can, of course, add stuff, subtract stuff, multiply, divide, and then the modulo, which is also interesting. I'm going to cover that. And then you have some logic operators, equal, greater, lesser, and, or, not, and so on. And at this stage, we can just jump into, I have 3 terminals open here. I hope you can see that. I don't know if they're too small. Perhaps I should make them a little bigger for you. So this is Node.js. This terminal that I have in the middle of the screen at the moment. And if you want to do some addition, you just do, for instance, 2 plus 2. That's pretty straightforward. It equals 4. If you want to do the same thing in Python, you do that here, and you get the same result, right? And okay, I'm in the middle of something here. Puss. All right, that's my son. And if you want to do the same thing in Ruby, you do the same thing here, right? It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? So you can do basic math here, and you can divide something like this, and so on, right? So you probably want to try this out at some point. For instance, like if you want to compare 2 objects in, let's say, 2 values in Python, you ask a question whether 4 equals 4. That returns true. So you do this double equal in Python. You do the same thing in Ruby. You do it slightly different in JavaScript because you can do double equal. Oh, but you can also do a triple equal. Does anybody know what's the difference between double and triple equal is in JavaScript? Any ideas?
Type checking.
Once again?
It's type checking.
Type checking, right. So if it's the same type. Daniel, you raise your hand.
We had it today with deep equal, right?
Yes, I think if it's equal and identical.
Yes. If it's equal and identical, absolutely. Well, Anya, you were saying?
We went through the tests that you were doing on Thursday, and Pedro helped me this morning on the channel on Twitch, and we replaced the assertion equal to equal with deep equal, and that helped us as well compare the 2 objects without the stringify.
Right.
Just
right. That simplified that code. I was struggling with that at the end of that session. I remember that one. Yes.
It's basically always use the triple equal, but I might have not gotten a job because I didn't know the difference between the double equal and the triple equal.
Oh.
One of the questions.
Did that cost you a job?
Well, I mean, there was another question. I don't know. They didn't say because you didn't answer that question.
You see, sometimes the small things matter a lot, right? So I always struggle with less than or greater than signs, but you get that. You can use that as well. And already at this stage, if you pay attention, we can see small differences. You see in Python, true and false are spelled with a capital T and F in the beginning, whereas in JavaScript and in Ruby, they are not, right? So you see false is spelled with small, but it's the same thing. This is a boolean. It's either true or it's false, and that concept exists in all 3 languages. It exists in, like, I think 100% of programming languages. I would be surprised if it didn't. Let me just. I forgot to update one thing on Agile Ventures. Sorry about that. Agile Ventures. Sorry. I need to do that. Upcoming events. Oh. Okay. There we go. We're just gonna go back to this thing. Now, there we go. Save. Okay, sorry about that. Right. So we can say something like, if we talk about variables, right? In Ruby, you don't have to declare a variable in any way. So you can say, for instance, name equals Thomas, like this. And then I can check the class on it. And it tells me, when I do .class, it tells me that it's a string, right? Now, in JavaScript, you have to say let name equals Thomas. Like this, and it returns name if we ask for it, right? There is a difference here in Ruby interactive shell. If you declare a variable, it is always being returned to you when you hit enter. In JavaScript, when you declare a variable and set its value and you execute that, it returns undefined, which is sometimes very confusing, especially when you start out with that. It was confusing for me, I remember, but it is being set. The default quotation marks in JavaScript are single quotes, unless you need anything else. Whereas in Ruby, the default quotation marks are double quotes, unless you set them to singles. If we say, in Python, we also don't have to. Thomas, there we go, Thomas. I can't spell my own name, right? And so here you have to ask for it like this. So it's a slightly different behavior, but it's pretty much the same thing, right? Here, if you wanna, in JavaScript, you wanna check the type of the variable. You say type of, and you will have string returned for you. Whereas in Ruby, you have to say .class to get the type returned. If we say type of 10, for instance, in JavaScript, we can see it's a number, where in Ruby we say 10.class, and it says it's an integer, right? Now, the interesting part is that if we say 10.5, sorry, type of 10.5, it is still a number in JavaScript, but if we say 10.5.class, we can see that in Ruby it's actually a float. Let's see if 10.5, can I do class here? No, I can't do that here. I'm not very good.
Type.
It's type, right?
Just type.
Right.
Yeah. Not .type, but as in JavaScript, you call type.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There you go. You learned something new.
I believe that's it.
Right. Class float. Right. And whereas 10 would be a number, right? Or integer. Okay. So it's pretty much the same thing. Now, we spoke about arrays and objects, right? So an object in JavaScript is very simple. So we can say before we move on to objects, so variables are like containers of data, okay? And the name variable kind of implies that it should it could vary, it could be changed, right? But any type of variable that you know as a programmer will not change should be a constant, right? And in JavaScript you can change variables. So we have this name Thomas, but I can say I can change that to Tadeusz, for instance, right? So now the name changed. And of course, if I want to change a variable, I don't have to declare it again because it has already been declared. So I only use the let keyword in the beginning. Now, if I would say const age equals 49, that's my age actually, right? Now, if I would like to say that age should be changed to 50, that's not gonna work because it's a constant variable. It's not a variable that can be mutated. Okay. Now the problem again, I'm gonna do very little Python because I'm not that proficient in that stuff. But if we do a constant in Ruby, usually in Ruby constants are uppercase, so you just do this age and then equal and then 49, for instance. But this is not immutable. I could change this age equals 50. It will give me a warning because it was already assigned, but it actually changes it, right? So age is 50 now, right? So what you could do potentially is to freeze that. So you say 50.freeze, but that wouldn't help too much anyway. So if I do age equals 51, it still is modified, right? So that is a bit dangerous. So there are certain caveats in Ruby and in other programming languages that needs to be taken into account, pretty much.
So, sorry, Thomas. In Ruby, how do you say that is a constant?
Yeah, well, you don't really. You just
Okay.
by convention you use an uppercase letters.
Uppercase.
Yeah. But there are different ways to really lock them down, but they are not kind of so if you read documentation, they say that if you freeze it, then it should be immutable, but I don't know if that should be called on this one. I don't know.
So I was going to ask, I think in this case, the dot freeze is like a memory management thing. I think if you, well, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a pointer probably. So
also, Thomas, I wanted to ask you, when you have the three screens open, could you have the third screen on the bottom right? Because in Twitch, when you had it at the bottom left, your video was looking. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Thanks.
Right. Exactly. So you can do this kind of operations. And let's move on and see if we can answer a few other questions. So you can do all the math related stuff one way or another. That's just the way it is, right? But let's I mentioned this modular operation. So that calls for a explanation, because it is definitely something that you should know, because if somebody asks you to do the FizzBuzz kata or FizzBuzz challenge at some point, you need to understand the modulo operation, and that is it's always easier to explain that with examples. But in computing, this operation returns the remainder of a division if you take one number and divide it by another number. So for instance, if you divide 5 with 2, the modulus operator will evaluate to 1, because 5 divided by 2 has a whole number of 2 and then a remainder of 1, because it's 2.5, right? So there is a decimal after the division. Whereas if you divide 9 with 3, it evaluates to 0 in this case, because the division 9 by 3 has a quotient of 3 and a remainder of 0. There's nothing to after the dot. And if we look at that in our terminal here in Ruby, you say 5 percentage sign 2, and that equals 1, right? That's the percentage sign is the modulus operator. It doesn't have anything to do with percents, but rather the modulus operator, right? So if you say 9 mod 3, that would equal to 0, and it's the same thing here, I'm pretty sure, right? And 9 3 will equal 0, and if we look at it in JavaScript, it's the same thing. So 5% 2 would equal 1, and 9% 3 would equal 0. So this modulus operator exists in all three languages, and it works exactly the same way. Not many people outside of computing knows about this, of course, because why would they? But this actually comes in handy when you do some mathematic operations on your stuff. Does that make sense, people? Kind of? Good. All right. So very often in our programs or software, we need to make decisions based on some stuff. So how do we make decisions? And again, another concept. There are these if statements or if-else statement. If something evaluates to true, here comes the booleans, right? That we spoke about earlier. Then do something. Otherwise, do something else. Pretty easy. In Ruby, we have a statement or keyword called unless, which is like a reversed if statement. So unless this is true, then do something else. Unless doesn't come with an else statement, or at least it shouldn't come. And that's specific for Ruby. Then we have the switch case operator. We are looking at a specific piece of data, and in case that data equals to something, then do something, and then you do something else in another case, and so on and so on. So the switch case is often a very good alternative to nested if statements, one would say, that looks like shit after a short while. So one should be very, very careful with too many if statements. And then you have in Ruby and in Python, you have, well, in Ruby definitely you have the when then, which is a different syntax for the switch operator. That's pretty much the same thing. It's just a slightly different syntax, and that helps you make decisions. If this data is present, do that. If it's not present, do something else. If there's an attribute on an object, do something or allow something to happen, and if it's not, then you do something else, right? It's a very basic concept that needs to be perfected by every programmer, of course. And then you need to be able to repeat instructions quite often, very often, right? So you have your for loops, and apparently there's this one parenthesis too many here. So you have your for loops, which is basically when you have an array of objects and you want to do something to every object in that particular array. So you iterate over it. That's what we often say. Let's iterate over this array. So you can repeat some instructions. Then you have your while loops and or do while variants of a while loop. A while loop is basically a way for you to tell the computer to do something as long as something is evaluated to true, right? So let's say that you want to perform an operation until you reach a value of 100, 100 times of repetitions, right? So you just create a number, you do perform an operation, and you increment that number every time you perform this instruction, and after a while this number will reach 100, and then you basically stop at this point, right? So while loops are interesting. In Ruby we have another variant of this loop that is called until, which is a reversed while, basically. Very simple. Oh, sorry. And then of course you have this thing, like if you can do all those things, you can iterate over arrays, you can create them, store them in variables, you can set the data, and so on. You want to store your procedures or your instructions in functions, methods, but you can also encapsulate functionality into classes and modules, right? And let's talk a little bit about functions to start with. Just to group some functionality or some instructions. So if we take a look at JavaScript to start with, a very basic function could be function, and let's say add stuff, and we allow this function to take two arguments, A and B, for instance, and then we just whoops, sorry. No, that's not how you do it. There we go. Right. And then we say return A plus B, like this, and you close this thing, and that's it, right? So now if I want to use this function to actually add things to each other, I can just say add stuff, and then 10 and 20, and that would perform this operation, right? It's nonsense, of course, but that's how you create a function in JavaScript. Now, if we take a look at Ruby, you do this slightly different, but the concept is pretty much the same. You say def and then add, and then we do this in Ruby. So it's a conventional thing that you do not use camel case in Ruby generally, and then A and B, and then we just say A plus B. In Ruby we can omit the return statement because Ruby always returns the last operation in a function, in a method, and then we say end, and now we can say add stuff 10, 20, and we get the same result here. It performs that instruction, right? So this in JavaScript is the equivalent of this in Ruby. And if we talk about Python, let's see, you do say def add stuff A B, def add stuff A B. No, what? Oh, it's sorry. There we go. Oof. And then we say return A plus B, like this. Oh fuck! Come on, give me a break. We have to intend. There we go. Return A plus B. There we go. And now that's it, right? And now I can say add stuff 10, 20, right, 30. Now Python is a bit annoying because it is heavily dependent on indentation. If you mess anything up as I just did, then Python will complain heavily. And you cannot mix So you usually, I think you usually intend with using tabs in Python, and you can't mix that. You can't use tabs sometimes and spaces other times. If you have to be consistent, which makes it extremely annoying, in my opinion. So yeah. So does Castras has problems joining the session?
He's here now.
Oh, he is. Okay, good.
I'm here now. I'm
All
here
right.
now.
Okay, good. Sorry for I know I missed to push this up a little bit. Right. So so that's a little bit about very briefly about functions and methods. So functions are called methods in Python and in Ruby, but it's the same thing basically. Now, to make things a little complicated in JavaScript, you can store functions in constants today and use a slightly different notation. So you can do something like this, for instance. Let me just put this in the center. You can do const add stuff to. So this is second method, right? And we can say equals and then A and B, and then you'd use this arrow function notation like this, and then you say return A plus B, and then you just close the block like this, right? So now we will have the same thing as we did before, 10 and 20, and it returns the same value. And I know that, so I see that Mirsad is here today with us. Welcome, Mirsad. I know that you're more of a JavaScript expert than I am, but in modern JavaScript, we usually use the arrow function format, and for many people, this function keyword has fallen a little bit out of style. I don't know if you agree with that, but there are actually differences between those two notations, right?
Yeah, so Thomas, my understanding was that function is newer and it's like cleaner looking. But because all the old code and old JavaScript developers are used to doing it using a pointer function, that's more the second format is more common.
Right, it's actually the other way around, Ethan. The arrow function is newer than function syntax. So that's actually that's the quite opposite. But yeah, so many legacy code applications that you will encounter usually have function keyword in them, and newer applications usually use the arrow function. But there is a very big difference in those two, and that is there are two differences. Hoisting, that's one thing, and then keeping scope, accessing this in those two. I will cover that in another talk, but because it's a little bit out of scope for today. But just know that they are not exactly the same. So if the shit hits the fan, sometimes it is safer to go back to this old notation for debugging purposes. Quite often, I would argue. Mirza, did I miss anything in this explanation at this point?
Also, how the this works.
Yeah, that's the scope. That's the this. Yeah. So I saw this meme once, like sometimes I go back to coding JavaScript, but then I realize that I hate this shit, and this is the thing. This is extremely annoying, and it calls for a different for another talk, so we can access that. Anya, didn't you struggle with this at some point in Vue? I remember we had that stream where there was a lot of talk about this.
Wait, you mean about the arrow function?
Well, yeah, but also the scope of this in the context of Vue. is like a view component has a it's instantiated, so it has this available, hasn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's a bit annoying.
I think my Java class at university already gave me some hints to better understand it, but I'm assuming that this in Java and this in JavaScript are probably different as well.
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
needs
Right.
more deep dive. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's move on to another topic then, because then we can do some more advanced stuff. So in this console that I just opened, you can open an IRB console, a Node console, or JavaScript console, and Python console. You can do only as much because you are dependent on hitting the right enter button at the right time, as I obviously don't do always. So it's not very easy to program in those consoles. You can execute a little bit of code and try things out and so on, but these are not good programming environments, of course, right? So let's talk a little bit about how can we store and run programs, which is very simple, to be honest. First, let's define what is a program or a piece of software. So once you've learned quite a few instructions and you have a basic idea of what you want to do or what you want your piece of software to actually achieve, then you write these instructions so that the computer does what you want it to do. And now everything is flickering on my screen. Why is that happening? Okay, here we go. But you don't want just to create a set of functions or instructions and what have you, in a console and then forget about it, and you have to rewrite them next time you want to do the same thing. You want to save those instructions in files, right? So you can execute them, and we can do all of that, and we will create a very simple hello world, because as we often talk about, things do start with hello world, and we want to do that in Python, in Ruby, and in JavaScript. Very simple stuff, right? So we know how to execute those files. So I just want to go over. Yeah, before we do that, another thing. How do I get out of this console? I don't know if you guys are in those consoles, but you want to get the hell out of Dodge. In Node, I think you say .exit. Yes, and then you're out. In Ruby, you just say exit, and you're out. And in Python, you say exit as a function with the parentheses, and you're out. So there are different ways of doing that. .exit, exit, and exit with parentheses, and you're out of the console. Ruby is quite different, because this Ruby is created by a Japanese guy that is a very friendly person, and he's a true humanitarian. And so he thought that he heard that a lot of programmers that was using IRB wanted to be able to say quit rather than exit. It felt better for them. So so we just added that to the language. So you can say quit here instead of exit, right? And that is the biggest difference between Python and Ruby. That's a very small example, but the biggest difference between Python and Ruby is that in Ruby there are multiple ways of achieving the same result, whereas Python, from what I hear, is very rigid. There is a Python way or the highway, right? It's very, very strict. And I'm not going to shit on Python, because Python is a great programming language, but to me personally, Ruby is the better alternative. But JavaScript rules the world anyway, so that's the way it is. So let's create a small folder and just call it concepts. you know, whatever, and cd into that. And let's touch hello world dot py, and another one that is called .rb, and the third one, but we want to follow conventions, so we want to say hello world .js, world.js, and then open this up in our code editor. And yeah, I trust the author. I just created it. So you can see that I have 3 different files, 3 different extensions, and my VS Code already knows that this is a Python file, another one is a Ruby file, and so on, right? So let's say we open up the Python one today. There we go. Come on. What's going on here? Okay, so I don't want to install anything. Right, so here I can just say print as a parentheses. Come on, get lost. Parentheses, and then as a string, hello Python, like this. No, come on. Hello Python, and that's it. If I go to, and I save, of course, I go to Ruby and I say puts hello Ruby, and then if I go to JavaScript, I say console log hello JavaScript. Something like this. Oops. Well, one too many, right? Yeah. Sorry. No. There we go. Hello JavaScript. So print hello Python, puts hello Ruby, console log hello JavaScript. Okay. So if I go back to my terminal now, and if I say node hello world JS like this, and just hit enter on this guy, we can see that this one says hello JavaScript. If I now say Python, no, what is it? No, yeah, Python, and then hello world Py, it says hello Python. And if I say Ruby, hello world Ruby, it says that, right? So that's how you execute those files. Pretty straightforward, right? Nothing extraordinary there. If we want to say something like let random value, right? Value equals 10, like this, and then say something if value is 10, then we want to say something like value is greater than 10, else I want to say console log value is less than 10, like this, and I format my code, right? So if I now execute this guy, value is less than 10. Well, what? It's not 10. Well, 10. Come on, 10 or equal, right? is greater than 10. So if we put this to 9, we see that this if statement is kicking in, right? I just wanted to show you that you can execute JavaScript code in your terminal as any other program. And why is that important? Well, a lot of people think that JavaScript is only executable in your browser in any way, which is not the case. It is just a programming language as everything else. This implementation that of JavaScript that you have available on your computer is executable on your in your terminal as any other programming language, which is of course a good thing. And if you want to, we're going to stop this part of the talk right now, but any code that you write in any of these files will be executable, and you can use those if statements, while loops, and all of these operators that we kind of covered briefly in this presentation. Depending on what language you want to use, the syntax will vary, but the concepts are pretty much the same. And so one would ask, like, why do we even have many different programming languages? And that's a discussion in itself. But different programming languages are built for different purposes, or was built for different purposes originally. Now, Python is extremely strong in statistics and mathematics and very heavy calculations, and it's often used by finance people and scientists, and doing some heavy calculations. Ruby was created as a scripting language to perform a lot of manual tasks, to automate a lot of manual tasks in DevOps, and it's very strong on accessing file systems and running background jobs and things like that. And JavaScript is JavaScript. It was created and used for to enrich and enhance websites, and has since evolved a lot, and are nowadays used to also power server-side applications through the Node.js runtime. Right, that pretty much covers what I had to say about this for now. Where's my presentation? I don't know. Any questions so far about that? Any thoughts? You just want to have a break, right? It's like back to school. Can you just stop talking? Let's take 5 people. I know that we have another half an hour at least, and I would like to talk a little bit about agile methodologies with you, if that's okay. All right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, folks. Take a breather, and I see you in 5 minutes. Or something like that. There it is.
Probably even talking about it in the channel backup, so I think
Thomas, I was going to ask you a question. I don't know if you're going to take the break or stay around.
I was hoping for a quick.
Go ahead.
Quick toilet break. So we can, if that's okay, we can save that.
We have time to talk for sure.
Yeah, I'll be right back, folks.
Carl, I want the Zimbabwe stories.
There's not enough time for that.
I know.
So
what do
did
we
you
do?
know? Yeah, did you know about that we had highest inflation in the world a few years ago? Years ago?
Yeah.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Highest
I know.
inflation?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah.
number of people were crossing the border to South Africa to get
Oh,
bread.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you'd buy bread, petrol, cooking oil, all kind of supermarket stuff from the border, come back and sell it for profit. We'd have the black markets. I'd go queue before school in the morning to get bread, and we were limited to, I think, 1 or 2 loaves per household. And other people
Wow.
do the same, buy up all the bread, then sell it on the street for hiked prices.
Crazy.
Yeah, I can tell you lots of stories. When I came in 2008, I have a bill, which is one bill is 50 billion Zimbabwe dollars,
Mm-hmm.
and it got worse after that.
Mm-hmm.
So 2017, they finally officially used US dollar as official currency.
Okay.
But before that, I asked my mother, so how bad did it get before that? And it was so bad that one apple cost 6 trillion Zimbabwe dollars.
Oh my God.
And this is, they already took out zero. So inflation was so high, numbers exploded. Then eventually the government would say, okay, we're going to take like 6 zeros of everything. Then it would grow again, and you had to be switched on with the prices and everything.
Crazy. How do you live with that type of inflation? I think it's really interesting because we're all a little bit afraid of higher inflation here. I mean, generally in the world, I guess. But yeah,
So you put your money in something that keeps its value. So you'd get
Bitcoin.
forex, you get.
I
Well,
was
that
gonna say when will they accept Bitcoin? Because El Salvador moved, so Zimbabwe.
I think something just happened and Carl just somehow
Uh,
disappeared. Yeah, but there are
it
these
was the
old stories.
it
There
was
are
the
these
word.
old stories.
It was probably the word Bitcoin, and then the secret services in Zimbabwe cut the conversation.
No, they're like those were really crazy times. I used to hear
Ah,
about that stuff and just think this doesn't make any sense.
that's insane.
Yeah, there were also like old stories from. There's a very old story. I don't know if it's real or not about deflation back in Germany. There's a story about a lady who's carrying all this money in a wheelbarrow, and
yes.
yeah, and the thieves rob her and take the wheelbarrow and leave all the money because the wheelbarrow is worth more than all the
Ah,
money that was in it. Yeah.
No,
yeah, that
actually,
was.
it was a very good advert. It was an advert like someone's, because you had to have this huge amount of money, right? Someone is pushing a wheelbarrow full of money to the bank, and just put the wheelbarrow down for a moment to open the door, and someone chucks out the money and steals the wheelbarrow because it's worth more.
Hmm.
Yeah,
That's
that's a
fine.
deflation thing. It's worse than inflation.
I experienced hyperinflation when I was growing up in Poland back in the 80s. When we, yeah, from 81, 82 to 89, we had like an average of 15,000. No, sorry, not 15,000, but something between 1,500 to 2,000% inflation every year, right? So they started to print millions or 10 million zloty bills and so on. And when I was growing up, 20 zloty could buy me a can of candy or anything. And at the end of the decade, that was just nothing. It wasn't even worth picking up, right? So no, hyperinflation is extremely annoying because people, they don't even have an incentive to go to work, because the inflation is so high on a monthly basis that the pay that you get is not worth your effort, basically, right? So yeah, that's a bit of a hassle.
Yeah, like my cousin decided to just keep chickens and sell eggs and chicken meat because it's cheaper for her than have to deal with petrol and all that, and then the hyperinflation situation.
Yeah. I see that we got raided from that knob. Thank you very much for the raid. We are in the middle of going through a class for our community-driven training program that is called Work the Web, and we are about to start talking about agility. We just covered a little bit of programming basics, very basic thing, comparing JavaScript, Ruby, and Python just just briefly touching upon some things. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about Agile. Um, well, if your viewers will enjoy that, then go ahead and stick around and let us know what you think. Working Agile, Scrum and XP. We're going to talk about this briefly now, and ask me questions if you have any. I have quite a lot of slides on this deck, so we'll see how many of them we can cover. It will be recorded, so don't feel that if you start to fall asleep, that's perfectly fine. Let's get started. So, the Agile Manifesto is the the basis of this talk, and one of the co-signers of that manifesto is a guy named Mike Cohn, and he said at some point that changing practices is one thing, changing minds is quite another. And I thought that this is a good quote for this talk, because some of us have experience within coding or working on projects, and some of us are used to certain project management methods. Some of you have only worked solo so far, not perhaps not having been part in bigger projects yet, and so on. And we all have some pre-made ideas about what works and what don't work, right? So bear with me on this one. Agile works wonders for me. It can work for you, doesn't necessarily have to, but since you are here, you might as well have an open mind when you listen to this talk. Now, when we talk about agility, there is so many buzzwords used by so many people. When if you read books or if you listen to talks or blog posts and so on, people are throwing around an extreme amount of terminology, like user stories, sprint, Scrum, Agile development team, yada yada, right? And some of them are actually relevant. Quite often I get a feeling that people are just using fancy words or a lot of terminology for the sake of using them, because they think it's cool. I try not to, and I try to keep things down, to make them as easily as accessible as possible. But even I have to put words or put names on certain concepts. So if there is something that you don't understand, just let me know, and I try to clarify things for you. But it's a big topic. Agility is a very big topic, and it's a topic that engages a lot of people, and people have opinions about things. So let's have a discussion about this later on. So what I want to cover today is the Agile Manifesto. Of course, talk about what Agile is and how it differs from any other project management methods or methodologies or philosophies. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a specific implementation of Agile, which is called Scrum. And then we're also going to touch briefly upon another framework that is called extreme programming, that comes with a set of best practices that, in my opinion, my humble opinion, works well with the Agile approach. And then I'm going to address a few misconceptions and myths about Agile that are worth knowing about, because you will stumble upon them sooner or later anyway. So if we just try to define what Agile is to start with, it is one form of software development methodology, which automatically implies that there are other forms that you can use when you build projects or when you build non-trivial software. The main focus of agility is client satisfaction through continuous delivery by limiting the project scope. And that sounds fancy. What does that mean? It means that there's a very simple equation. Large projects and very complex projects have a tendency to fail. They have a tendency to go over budget. They have a tendency to wear out developers, so they move on to other tasks, and new people come in with limited understanding of the project, and everything just go overboard, and everything turns to shit, right? So if you limit project scope, if you create smaller projects out of large ones, you enhance or increase chances of your project to becoming a success. And another concept, and I will talk about this in Agile, to make continuous delivery possible, is incremental in iterative design and work. So you don't try to fix the entire problem at the first iteration, but just you fix parts of it by splitting things down and scoping things down as much as possible. So the limitation of project scope is a very basic concept in agility, and that is extremely important. Now, an agile project always has a minimum number of requirements and turns it into a deliverable product or service or what have you, right? So working software is the primary measurement of progress in Agile, not the amount of documentation, not the amount of meetings, not anything else, but actual working solution to the problem that we set out to fix. And it's very simple, to be honest, but there's still a lot of things to be said about agility. So let's get started. Now, 10, 12, 13 years ago, a bunch of guys, and it was unfortunately exclusively blokes, got together in a weekend conference and started to talk about the fact that there's so much things going on in the software development industry that is not okay. At that point, Gartner Group, which is one big analyst firm, they came up with this staggering figure that almost 70, if not more, % of all projects was either abandoned, went over budget, didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver. And for an industry, that is an extremely bad number. You can't justify your own existence if 70% of the work you do is just not worth anything, and yet it's extremely costly. So these guys, they got together and said, and all of them were proficient and very, very experienced software developers, and they got together and said, we have to do something about this. There is something fundamentally wrong with the way we do projects, large-scale enterprise projects. And so they discussed this over a period of time. This weekend conference is famous with by its deliverable, the thing that they came up with, which was the manifesto for agile software development. And they said that we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it, actually being involved in it and helping others do it. And through this work, we have come to value the following: individuals in interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan strictly. And so these 4 principles are really important. And they are also often misunderstood because people tend not to read the next 2 following lines. That says that is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. It doesn't mean that agile projects do not value processes and tools. They're extremely important for us, of course. Documentation is also important. Contract negotiation, yes, we need to understand the scope, and everyone needs to be in sync with each other. And we do plan. We just don't plan too much. We sometimes talk about just enough planning for shorter periods of time. But people and interaction between people, working software, collaborating with our customers, and responding to change requirements over time are more valuable than the other stuff. The manifesto is translated into many languages. There is a website with that, of course. Here's a screenshot of the Swedish version. I do think that the website where you can find the Agile Manifesto is one of the ugliest websites ever made, I would say. They didn't pay much attention to CSS and styling, but the content is nonetheless the best part of it. And apart from these very high level principles that we just talked about, there are 12 ideas or principles attached to the manifesto. And I cherry picked some of them that are important to me personally, that resonate well with me for various reasons, right? What they spoke about is that our highest priority in the industry, working with software, is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. And there are a few keywords here. Early and continuous delivery of valuable software. So valuable software, of course, means that we need to actually make some impact on either the business that we are supporting or the society that we are working on or whatever. But we try to roll out features and software as soon as that feature is actually ready to go to production, as soon as a feature fixes at least a bit of the overall bigger problem. So by rolling out features continuously, we can also validate that early on, see if we need to fix some bugs, see if it actually does what it's supposed to do. Another principle that they spoke about is that they want to deliver software frequently in time frames from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, and preferably in a shorter time scale. So move fast. And this, for those of you who have heard or read about lean in business development, this plays very well with the lean startup ideas, for instance, and so on. And then the principle that I cherish the most, of course, working software is the primary measure of progress. It doesn't matter how much we talk about it, document it, think of, meet on conferences or whatever. At the end of the day, if your code does what it is supposed to do, that's the measurement of progress you should focus on. And I think personally that the agile way of doing things is an approach that embraces change, which in this very fast-moving world is a virtue. It's a good thing. Already a decade ago, these people spoke about that they want to welcome change requirements, even late in development, and that agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. There's no reason for us to formulate a plan in 2021, set off on a journey to build a very complex system in 6 months or 12 months time, and then in 12 months, let's say, return to the customer and say, hey, this is what we agreed upon 12 months ago, whereas the world around us has changed significantly during that period of time, and the plan that we formulated originally might even not be relevant anymore, right? So you know how it is. If you set out from Liverpool across the North Atlantic, if you just navigate 1 degree wrong with your boat and cross the Atlantic, you might end up in South America somewhere, right, instead of New York. So if you make a slightest wrong assumption in the original plan and let too much time pass from planning to delivery, you might be totally off in terms of what you actually built. So early validation, continuous deployment and delivery of software validates that you are on the right track, as long as you always have the customer's competitive advantage, his best interest in focus at all times. So change is the only constant in life. Is something that I often say and refer to, and agile methodologies do embrace that fact. But it's also very business oriented, which is something that is of course a prerequisite for us to exist in the first place, right? When we move from hobby programming to professional software development, we need to focus on the business needs of our clients one way or another. And in order to make that work, I truly believe that this approach that they spoke about in the Agile Manifesto, where when they say that business people and developer must work together on a daily basis throughout the project, is a very important one. we, the developers, we need to understand the business people to a certain degree, and business people need to understand us to a certain degree. I usually try to illustrate that with two circles, like, moving into each other a little bit, not too much. We don't need to become experts on business, and nor does the business people need to become experts on programming and software development, but we do have to understand each other's lingo, each other's motivation, and why we do certain things. And we need to be able to collaborate, and for that we need to understand each other, and we have to speak the same language that the other people do. That is a really important thing. But more importantly than that is that the agile way of working is a people-oriented approach, right? In my opinion. And to that fact, the manifesto speaks about the need to build projects around motivated individuals. Give them the environment and the support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Micromanagement is not really welcomed in this agile approach. Self-organizing teams, cross-functional teams are things that we often talk about, meaning that we can take people with different competences, different backgrounds, and different strengths and weaknesses, and we can form teams with these people, and trust them that they together can get the job done, and leave them to make the day-to-day decisions on their own without constantly pushing them. And that is something that speaks to me personally. I like that. The fact that people or my managers hire me to tell them or to show them how things need to be done, and how we can solve problems, rather than hire me and then point me to how I am supposed to work. I don't want to just be a resource or a machine. I prefer to be a valued resource or valued person in an organization. The manifesto speaks about the fact that the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. You have to understand that this was written 10 years ago. But they do value synchronous communication, like, for instance, what we're doing now to meet over video conferencing, rather than communicating using documentation or preset type of documents and so on. Talking to each other beats everything else, like brainstorming ideas, trying things out, working together and collaborating is much better than just following strict procedures and protocols, in my opinion. And then another thing that is also important is that agile processes do promote sustainable development. In one way or another, the sponsors, stakeholders, developers, and so on should be able to maintain a constant pace moving forward through the project. Yes, sometimes we have to chase a deadline and we have to put in a lot of hours, but you can't build an entire industry around the fact that people are working themselves to death. We're not lawyers after all, right? Work in a sustainable pace, make sure to maintain life and work balance and so on, and that leads to good results and good effects in projects. So a people-oriented approach, which is something I really enjoy. And of course, it's all about learning. The agile approaches emphasize continuous attention to technical excellence and the path forward, because they do enhance agility. Things like simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work that we just don't do. We say that, yeah, this might be interesting and might be useful, but we have to prioritize other things, and there is beauty in simple solutions. I think we can all agree that complexity is the killer of all projects and also developers. So the simpler solutions we choose, the better, in my opinion. Again, they speak about self-organizing teams in terms of how best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge, and that is also something that is people-oriented and learning-oriented. And the fact that that we have to learn from our own actions and let our experiences guide us into a future and energize us is reflected in this principle where they speak about that at some regular intervals the team needs to sit down, ask themselves how can we become more effective, and then tune and adjust its behavior. That is the retrospective part that we spoke about earlier on in the context of learning itself. And then there is this so all of that sounds fantastic, right? Self-organizing teams do prioritization, do the right thing at the right time, and be as agile as possible about all of this. But we do understand, and we need to acknowledge that people like order and protocols and predefined sets of rules how to act. And I found this illustration that is kind of interesting one, because there is a difference between having an agile mindset and follow the agile practices, right? Doing agile versus being agile. We can't be super creative at all time, and we can't fall into anarchy when we do projects and customer work. We have to follow certain protocols, but these two things need to coexist in a balance, so that we can benefit from both sides, in my opinion. We need a set of protocols and we need a set of rules so that we can be creative and we can innovate and deliver good solutions. One side cannot exist without the other, in my opinion. And for that, we do have a set of approaches or protocols or frameworks that enhances agility, and one of them is called Scrum. There are others, of course, and there are also variants of Scrum. And Scrum is basically a set of tools and set of rules how teams can work in order to deliver non-trivial projects. It is said about Scrum that it's simple but not easy. Scrum is oriented around three things: roles, artifacts, and time boxes. The roles are fairly few. You have a Scrum Master, you have a product owner, and then you have a Scrum team. The artifacts are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the burn down chart, and then time boxes, because we have certain meetings that are mandatory in Scrum, but they are time boxed so that they don't take up too much time, because we want to spend more time delivering software than just meeting with each other and talking endlessly. So if we talk about time boxes, there are a few meeting types that are predefined in Scrum, and each of them have a maximum amount of time that we can spend on that. We have sprint planning, sprint commitment, we have a review and retrospective meetings, and then we have daily Scrum meetings that the team holds. We will talk more about them in a while. If we talk about the artifacts, they are also very simple. We can leave the burn down chart to the side. We're not going to talk about it today. We're just going to talk about the product backlog and the sprint backlog. And they are fancy words for a very simple thing, and that is a wish list, right? The product backlog in itself is a list or a bucket for all the requirements. There's a well described and in a specific way set of requirements, features that should be put in place so that the software actually does what it's supposed to do. And then what happens is that we work in something we call sprints in Scrum that are something between 7 to 14 or 28 days. And what you do at the beginning of each sprint is that you take a piece of the product backlog and move it to another list and say, this is what we will focus on in this particular sprint. And the way we choose those features is by having our product owner prioritize that. he or she will say that this time around we want to focus on a specific type of features because we deem that they are the most important ones for us, so we can deliver something at the end of the sprint. So prioritization comes into play a lot when we talk about the backlog for the product itself and for the sprint that we are currently working in. And so there's gonna come a lot of words here. Now, a sprint explained in 30 seconds. I don't know if I can talk that fast, but basically, a product owner creates a prioritized list, and we call it a product backlog. During a meeting called sprint planning, the Scrum team pulls a small chunk from the top of the wish list and puts it into a sprint backlog and decides how to implement those pieces. The team has a certain amount of time, which we refer to as a sprint, usually 2 to 4 weeks, to complete its work. And it meets every day to assess its progress in a daily Scrum meeting. Along the way, the Scrum Master keeps the team focused and on its goal. At the end of the sprint, the work should be a potentially shippable, ready to hand over to a customer, put on a shelf or whatever product, right, and show to a stakeholder. And the sprint itself ends with a sprint review with the client and a sprint retrospective within the team. And as the next sprint begins, the team chooses another chunk of the product backlog and begins working again. And that is done in the sprint planning, and the cycle starts over, right? So we have this list, we do things, and we ship some new features at the end of the sprint, and we start over again. And in a graphical form, this could be represented with this image that I stole somewhere. We have a product backlog, we have a sprint planning meeting that kind of defines what should we work on in this particular sprint. We create this sprint backlog, and then this 1 to 4 week or 2 week sprint begins. We talk to each other with the help of Scrum Master that facilitates if something goes wrong, if your computer is break down, or if you need a better set of tools, or if you misunderstood something as a team, you need some clarifications and so on. The Scrum Master is basically helping you to move forward one way or another. And at the end of the sprint, you have some finished work that you can show off to the client, and you do a sprint review with the client where you show it to them, and then you sit down within the team and say, whew, that was a tough sprint. What went well? What went wrong? How can we improve? And then you start the cycle again. And short sprints means that if you F up somewhere along the way, you only wasted 1, 2, 3 weeks of your time. Do you understand? You do not waste months of your time or quarters of work. You can be corrected, because if in the sprint review meeting the client says, hold on guys, you totally misunderstood what I was looking for, then you can correct that work and you are not overly invested. And that might sound like a weird thing, but trust me when I say that this is exactly what happens in many projects, that the development team develops something that is totally unnecessary. It happened millions of times in this industry, unfortunately. And now if we talk about XP, now the XP framework is a set of best practices for sound engineering principles, like behavior-driven development or test-driven development, like pair programming, of course using automated tests to make sure that the quality of your code is upheld, refactoring, making sure that once your feature is coded and works, you take a second and a third look at it and see if you can make it perform even better. Me and Shima talked about this earlier today. Then a good practice of peer code reviews, and then the idea of continuous integration and continuous deployment, so you can minimize the amount of manual work and focus on development rather than DevOps or unnecessary administration. Remember, configuration is not programming. Configuration is configuration. It's setting the stage for your programming ability or your programming endeavors, and then having your software being deployed to live servers is also a very important task. And if you can automate that, you should, because you want to focus on the creative part of actually building software and not just dealing with the administrative part of the whole thing. So this is a great combo that leverages the popularity and the ease of Scrum with the sound principles and practices of XP, and that makes people productive or hyper productive, which is something that you have to experience to understand what it is. But I've been in project teams where we can basically spit out massive amount of features on a daily basis, and that is a fantastic feeling when you know that you are right on target, you're right on the money, and you follow certain principles and you avoid bugs, and just you're in the flow. And that flow is a beautiful thing, in my opinion. So basically, iterative and incremental design. Working software is the primary measure of progress. Fix the problem for the client. And this is, of course, an oversimplification. We can have a lot of, apparently I forgot to change the Craft Academy stuff here. But anyway, we can have a long debate about this. But, in a more traditional waterfall kind of unit-based process, when you manufacture a car, you focus on the car itself. Whereas in this agile approach, it could be symbolized by this flow of focusing on the need of the client, which in this case could be perceived as a need to transport a person from point A to point B, which can be done on a skateboard, on a bike or something. And at the end, you produce something that not only fulfills the need, but also makes him really, really happy. And that would be probably the convertible Porsche or whatever it's there. Again, it's a bit over. It's a simplification, but I think it's a nice nice illustration. That's why I included that in this topic. Working software quickly and early. It is less costly if you change. If change happens, and it will happen. Change is inevitable. If you work with short sprints and short time frames, it is less costly for you to change requirements. It is easier to test and debug and validate during smaller iterations or shorter iterations. Customers can respond to each build. It's easier to have a client meeting and validate on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis than after 3 or 6 months. It usually lowers initial delivery costs, and it is better risk management if you work in an agile way. But there is a lot of misconceptions. I've been a propagator of agile methodologies, and I've worked in agile for many years. And sometimes when you hear people talk about agility, they try to kind of sell this as a solution to every problem on earth or in software development. And I've seen adaptation of agile to human resource, to marketing, and to all of that stuff. There's a lot of charlatans out there that just love to make some money out of this topic. People claim often that it's a silver bullet, it fixes everything, right? But then there are the antagonists, and that claim that agile is anti-documentation, it's anti-planning, that it's undisciplined, that it requires a lot of rework, it's anti-architecture, and the best one is that it doesn't scale. So let me address this just a little bit. Like agile is not a silver bullet. You can fail just as spectacularly on an agile project as you can do using any other methodology. Some words just got lost here. There is nothing inherently magical about agile. The only thing I can say is that agile helps you to bring your development team and your customers as close together as you can, give them what they need, and then just get the hell out of the way and trust people to do their job. And I think that is the best way to approach software development, but to be honest, everything else in life as well. Now, People say that Agile is anti-documentation, which is not the case. The only thing is that we do not document for documentation's sake, for just to have a lot of documents, which is the case in many methods like waterfall or Roop or anything like that, right? Documentation is just a mean of communication, and documentation can be something else than just shitloads of documents. It could be tests, and it could be asynchronous communication, and so on. We want to estimate each feature. We want to size it and prioritize, things in Agile as we do in many other project management methodologies. And again, tests in themselves, if we use XP, automated tests are a form of documentation in themselves. So that is simply not true. People claim that Agile is anti-planning, which is not the fact. There is a shitload of planning going on in each Agile project on a continuous basis. The only thing is that we try to avoid to plan for an uncertain future. We plan 10 to 15 minutes a day in the daily stand-ups. That is planning. We do this bi-weekly or sprint planning in various meetings and so on. It's just that we don't plan for the sake of plan, and we don't have to follow everything strictly, because we do acknowledge that change is the only constant, and if change happens, we have to revise our plans. People claim that Agile is undisciplined, which is far from the truth. I know that, and I have a scar tissue to show for it. You have to test, you have to get feedback from your client, and trust me when I say that the clients don't always like what you show them. Even though you try to communicate well and you try to understand what the client means, you still end up coding something that they don't want. You have to regularly ship software, working stuff, not only overly promise that in 12 months we get something. You have to be very disciplined, because at the end of the sprint you need to have a shippable product. You have to work and update the plans, so you have to have disciplines for that. And last but not least, you have to deliver bad news early. Always. You can't hide in an Agile project, because if the shit ain't working, it ain't working, and people will know that, right? In a waterfall project, you can bury mistakes underneath, tons of documentation, if nothing else, right? People claim that Agile requires a lot of rework, but so does every other method, right? You will make mistakes, you will prioritize wrong, things will change, and again, to relate back to the first of the myths, it's not a silver bullet. Any type of creative work with a deadline faces the same challenges, and that's basically it. Well, the good thing is that if you are a good self-organizing team with good communication and an open mindset, you will discover better ways how to self-organize and how to move forward. So that is actually just a plus in an agile team. And then the last one, Agile doesn't scale. No, it does not. And it scales as good as any other software delivery process, not that good. No, there is no methodology that scales well. And the solution, we already mentioned that solution earlier today. Scale things down. Just do not bite off more than you can chew. If the project is way too big or it has too broad of a scope, just break it down into 2 projects or 4 projects or 8 projects, and make sure that you keep the teams in manageable sizes. A good agile team is something between 4 and 8 people, and just scale it down, as everything else in life, right? How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time, and the same thing goes. The same thing is true for software development. Yeah, we spoke about Agile core principles, Scrum, how to use Scrum together with XP, and I addressed a few myths about Agile, and I hope you guys found that interesting. At least you hang around, so must have been something. That's what I had for you. Any comments, people?
If you another thing, if
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I've heard those words a lot, Agile, Scrum, and yeah, it was really good because I didn't really know a thing about it. So just to have an overview was really good.
Thank you. Thank you. That do we have anyone that has been like exposed to agile at work before, or a variant of this kind of way of thinking?
I have before. Actually, quite recently, I got introduced into the agile methodology, and we did all that stuff. We did the daily stand-ups. We did the how do you call it, the retrospective. The we did the like an SLA in the beginning of the implementing the agile implementation, where we agreed on not staying still for 15 minutes, more than 15 minutes, trying to figure something out and ask for help straight away, stuff like that. So, and it did work out really well. So that's what I got to say about that.
Good stuff. Well, that's music in my ears, and I do like that principle that if you get stuck, you need to time box that as well. I like that. So debugging or bug hunting should not be done in isolation, but it's better to put a limit on. Yeah, I'll try for 15 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, and then I pull in a coworker or a scrum master or what have you, right? It's really good. And there are so many great tools that we can use to make things like that happen, but also enhance collaboration. Version control is, of course, one. Google Meet is another where we can share screens, or there is an extension to VS Code that is called LiveShare, where we can actually invite people to code on our own file system across distances in a remote setting. So technology can enhance agility a lot, in my opinion, if we just follow good practices.
So sorry, you go first, Carmen.
Yes, sorry. I'm just a little. I would like to know from your point of view, because I have heard in many agile, topic or talks about good communication. I'm just curious to know from your point of view, what will be a good communication? Because I feel like it's a very general concept. So
No,
does that make sense?
That's a super relevant
I feel
question. Yeah.
I feel like it's something important when you are across continent and different background, different people. So I'm curious to know to just get your thought about that, basically.
I would say that in those projects that I've been involved as a team member or as a senior lead, or also as a coach with my students, the projects that usually go overboard or are a failure or considered a failure are the projects where the team do not communicate with each other well, right? But as you say, Carmen, it's like what is good communication? Well, I would say that's almost a philosophical question, right? Because I would say that good communications is good communication is a communication that means that we actually understand each other. Do you understand? Like for instance, if we talk technical stuff and somebody introduces some lingo that the rest of the team do not understand because let's say it's a new piece of technology, or fancy words for something that is really simple, and the others are too afraid or too ashamed to ask for clarification because they don't want to lose face or what have you, right? That's an example of bad communication, right? And this happens a lot. You can be in meetings when somebody is talking about stuff and people are just nodding, yeah, sure. And at the end, they go like, shit, did you understand what this guy was talking about? No, man, I gave up early, right? So it's very hard to say what good communication is, but it's much easier to say what bad communication looks like, in my opinion. But if you take, for instance, finance people that are our clients and us developers, and we sit in the same room, even if we all speak English, the finance people could use a lingo that we just don't understand, special terms that are industry specific, and so on, right? And we are too afraid to ask, or we just don't bother. And then we start talking about technical things, and they just don't understand what we are talking about. Do you understand? And we are supposed to work on the same project, and that is just a guarantee for failure, because if we can't understand each other, then we won't be able to do anything together. I don't know if that makes sense, but I would say that yes, like make sure to ask a lot, and make sure to ask for clarification, and make sure that you really understand what the others are saying, and also try to use as few words as possible to convey a message. Coming from me, that just used way too many words to convey this, but okay. It's like, be precise, concise, and on target. It's important. Does that make sense, Carmen?
Okay, totally. Yeah, I think it makes totally sense. Explaining what's a bad communication versus what's a good communication, because I get that a lot. Like, we are, I get the whole, this thing. It's we're a good communicator, or in the team we have good communication, but then it's like people are confused, they don't know how to ask questions, or all the things that you mentioned, basically. So thank you.
So I can say that in those daily scrums, for instance, if we take that as an example, in by definition, if we are a group of 8 people, everyone gets to speak. It's like a requirement that there are 3 questions that you address in a daily stand-up or a daily scrum, and that is, what have I done since the last scrum, which means basically over the last 24 hours, unless there was a weekend in between. What is my plan for the next 24 hours? So look backward and look forward. And then the third one, do I have any obstacles or impediments, as we call them, right? So, my computer broke, can't work, right? So it doesn't matter if I have a fantastic plan, if I don't have a machine to work on, I won't be able to execute that. Or I have to take off because I have to go to the doctors, right? So my plan, whatever I had set out for me, it needs to be revised. Or I stumbled upon a programming issue that I just can't solve, and talk a little bit about that. Perhaps somebody else in the team has a solution, or they can help you come up with a solution, or pair program with you, or so on. And I can tell you that initially, when you form an Agile team or a Scrum team, and people don't know each other in the beginning and so on, people can be a little shy, and they go like, today I don't want to report. But the concept of a daily Scrum means that everyone needs to address those 3 questions with short sentences or long ones, doesn't matter, but everyone needs to speak. And after just a week or 2, people are growing more accustomed to each other and their own personal styles, and how they express themselves. And if this guy just mumbles a little bit, I have to listen carefully, and then there is another guy that is more verbose and is very assertive, and so on. So you get used to that, and within the team you formulate a good communication protocol just by doing it over and over and over again. Pedro, for instance, in your Agile experience, in those daily stand-ups and then retrospectives, did you all have to communicate, or was somebody free to
Everyone said something, but there weren't many of us. We were only 4. Besides the Scrum Master and the Product Owner. The Product Owner didn't really attend to the daily stand-ups, but
they usually don't.
Yeah. But everyone spoke. Yeah.
So you're supposed to keep them short, right? So if you have someone like Thomas always claims that he likes to talk. I've heard some teams doing planks during the stand-up, so that when it's your turn, you do planks. So you won't take too long.
So that's why we stand up. They are called stand-ups because we actually stand up during those meetings, and you can stand for 15 minutes and talk to people. Then you start to get tired of standing up, right? So yeah, 15 minutes is the is the time frame or time box for the daily stand-ups. Yeah.
Now,
We
I have a
also
question.
oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Also, a lot of people say a lot of some companies claim to do agile, but they're not really doing agile.
Yeah.
So, do you guys have experience with that?
Many.
I just feel like that applies to anything, right? Companies say they apply AI, artificial intelligence, and it's just something else. Blockchain, and it's just something else.
Yeah.
Agile is just something else. There's always going to be stuff like that, I feel like.
Absolutely. I would say that there's a lot of companies that want to implement agile one way or another for many reasons, not always good ones. I was at a meeting recently, and well, pre-pandemic, so it wasn't that recently, where we spoke about large corporations that are looking into agile, and they are. I can see two scenarios. One where the management want to impose agile, so that because they've heard about it and it sounds great, and the line personnel is like, get the F out of here. We know better than just listen to new hyped up methodologies and so on, right? Because they are usually skeptical to everything that comes from management, and that happens in many larger organizations. And then there is another scenario where we actually turn this around. The line personnel are frustrated because they can't get things done properly, and they want to impose a more agile approach to perform their tasks, and the upper management or the middle management are slowing it down. They say no to those changes, right? So implementing agile in larger organizations must come both from top down and from the lower parts of the pyramid and move upwards, and you have to have a mutual understanding. But there is also, again, there's a lot of consultants and people that are selling the agile gospel to corporations, and they charge good money for it. And I heard about this story from Spotify, actually. I want to share with you. There was this thing about cross-functional teams and this agile idea that sometimes you want to leave your own team and work on another team just to gain more insights and learn more, and be very flexible and where you are and grow as a person, right? And that was proposed to the line personnel, to the dev teams, by the agile coaches, and it took them 9 to 10 months to actually have one developer come to them and say, you know what, I would like to try to jump over to another team and actually get involved in another part of development. All right, and that was the first person, and then after that it took another 2 weeks before the next person did that, and then after a few months you had a massive amount of developers actually learning a lot and being flexible, jumping between different teams for a sprint or two, because you needed to have someone start that, to have the courage to do it, and it needed to take time, right? The agile evangelists, they often claim that as soon as you have a workshop like ours today and you hear a little bit of agile way of thinking and some theory behind it, you can become an agile practitioner. That is not the case. Things need to take time. It's a big difference to work in this way if you haven't done it before, right? So one has to be a bit careful. But Jeff Sutherland, it's another agile of the signees of the Agile Manifesto, and he's the principal behind Scrum.org. He usually talks about a phenomena called Scrum but. We practice Scrum, but we don't do this and that, right? So Scrum but is a concept in itself. It's just cherry picking a little bit of the Scrum artifacts and roles and so on. This is not easy in any way, people. It works if you want it to work, but it takes discipline and it takes courage actually to work in this way. And that's why I started out with this quote that changing practices is one thing. We can impose the daily scrums, the sprint retrospectives, the review meetings, and all of that stuff. That's one thing. But to actually have people practice Agile in a good way requires us to change some minds, and for that, practice is the only key. So hopefully we get to practice some Agile methodologies in our projects moving forward. Good stuff. Any other questions?
I was actually going to ask, we implemented this moment during the daily stand-ups, and I don't know if that's a standardized thing or it's something that we did. That was called the 16th minute.
Okay, well, and
I
what
don't
was
know
that?
if you ever heard about it.
And what
It was
that?
basically just stuff that, like the daily stand-up is supposed to be those three things from everyone that you said before. But if there was anything remaining that needed to be discussed over those 15 minutes, we called it the 16th minute. I don't know if that's a standardized thing or...
I haven't heard that expression, but I think it's a fantastic idea. You know, once we have like covered most of the bases, then there is always a little bit of things that hasn't been addressed. So I would definitely support that, definitely, unless those discussions tend to, you know, take precedence above everything else. That 16-minute turns out to be, you know, another half an hour or 45 minutes, and then I would be careful with that, probably.
Yeah, okay. So it's not something that everyone knows about. That's
No.
what I wanted to know.
No, I wouldn't
Got it.
say that. I wouldn't say that. Right. Right. So I guess that's it, folks. Right?
Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you. So the PDF from Sunday with the curriculum, if you have finished that, if you could share that in the Slack.
Will come right after this meeting. Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I missed it, but it's nice, your plans for the curriculum. I like it with GraphQL, Python. Yeah. It's good.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, folks. That does it for us today. I see you guys on Slack, or see you on Slack, or on Thursday night again.
I just have a silly question, but nothing too related to the class. But have someone, let's say, very very close to me in real life that just started streaming. Could you rate him?
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Again, I can put you the command here. You can just
What's
copy
the
paste.
username? Well,
yeah, here we go. That's the command. If you just copy paste that, it will work. Just to surprise him. No one's forced to stay. Plus, he's speaking French, so.
Where did you paste the command?
You just paste it in the chat
in
of Twitch.
Google Meets. Oh, in both, maybe.
Oh, there. Okay, I stopped scrolling. Okay, all right. That's gonna happen now. Boys and girls, thank you very much for today. Thank you for listening to me. And I see you Thursday. Okay, and that raid is coming up.
Thank you.
Cheerio, folks.
Yep. Thanks, Thomas.
Take
See you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I end the stream here right now.